We have quite a few things to look at for causes and effects, so let's get right into it. Abraham Lincoln, a self-taught lawyer, legislator, and vocal opponent of slavery, was elected as the 16th President of the United States in November 1860, shortly before the outbreak of the Civil War. Lincoln proved to be a shrewd military strategist and a savvy leader. His Emancipation Proclamation paved the way for slavery's abolition, while his Gettysburg Address stands as one of the most famous pieces of oratory in American history. In April 1865, with the Union on the brink of victory, Abraham Lincoln was assassinated by Confederate sympathizer John Wilkes Booth. His untimely death made him a martyr to the cause of liberty, and he's widely regarded as one of the greatest presidents in U.S. history. So his stance for the election of 1860 was containment of slavery, the Free Soil Movement, and the Transcontinental Railroad. The Free Soil Movement refers to its main purpose of opposing the expansion of slavery into the Western territories, arguing that free men on free soil comprised a morally and economically superior system to slavery. The Transcontinental Railroad would link the United States from east to west. The Great Depression lasted from 1929 to 1939 and was the worst economic downturn in the history of the industrialized world. It began after the stock market crash of October 1929, which sent Wall Street into a panic and wiped out millions of investors. Over the next several years, consumer spending and investment dropped, causing steep declines in industrial output and employment as falling companies laid off workers. By 1933, when the Great Depression reached its lowest point, some 15 million Americans were unemployed and nearly half the country's banks had failed. So as you're thinking of questions that you might be asked about the Great Depression, the income disparity, increase in debt, laissez-faire economics, over-speculation in stocks, and drought are all causes of the Great Depression and reasons for why it lasted so long. Probably the one here that you might not be familiar with is the laissez-faire economics, which essentially meant that the government really did not interfere with the recession/depression, and that is a move that has changed dramatically since the Great Depression. And even if you looked at something like the 2008 recession, the government interfered quite a bit with what was happening to keep another Great Depression from happening. The Dred Scott case was in 1857, and it was a United States Supreme Court decision affirming the right of slave owners to take their slaves into the Western territories, thereby negating the doctrine of popular sovereignty and severely undermining the platform of the newly created Republican Party. At the heart of the case was the most important question of the 1850s: should slavery be allowed in the West? Dred Scott was a slave whose owner, an Army doctor, had spent time in Illinois, a free state, and Wisconsin, a free territory at the time of Scott's residence. The Supreme Court was stacked in favor of the slave states. The court held that Scott was not free based on his residence in either Illinois or Wisconsin because he was not considered a person under the U.S. Constitution. The decision inflamed regional tensions, which burned for another 4 years before exploding into the Civil War. So with the Dred Scott case, really that's the important thing to know here, is that it's an indirect catalyst for the Civil War. Plymouth Colony, sometimes New Plymouth, was an English colonial venture in North America from 1620 to 1691. Plymouth Colony was founded by a group of separatists initially known as the Brownist Immigration and Anglicans, who became known as the Pilgrims. A significant proportion of citizens of Plymouth were fleeing religious persecution and searching for a place to worship as they saw fit, rather than being entrepreneurs like many of the settlers of Jamestown were. The social and legal systems of the colony became closely tied to their religious beliefs as well as English custom. Many of the people and events surrounding Plymouth Colony have become a part of American folklore, including the North American tradition known as Thanksgiving and the monument known as Plymouth Rock. The Intolerable Acts were the American patriots' term for a series of punitive laws passed by the British Parliament in 1774 after the Boston Tea Party. They were meant to punish the Massachusetts colonists for their defense of throwing a large tea shipment into Boston Harbor in reaction to being taxed by the British. In Great Britain, these laws were referred to as the Coercive Acts. The acts took away Massachusetts' self-government and historic rights, triggering outrage and resistance in the 13 colonies. They were key developments in the outbreak of the American Revolution in 1775. With the Louisiana Purchase in 1803, the United States purchased approximately 828 million square miles of territory from France, thereby doubling the size of the country. What was known as Louisiana Territory stretched from the Mississippi River in the east to the Rocky Mountains in the west, and from the Gulf of Mexico in the south to the Canadian border in the north. Part or all of 15 states were eventually created from the land deal, which is considered one of the most important achievements of Thomas Jefferson's presidency. Finally, we have Pearl Harbor. Just before 8 a.m. on December 7, 1941, hundreds of Japanese fighter planes attacked the American naval base at Pearl Harbor near Honolulu, Hawaii. The barrage lasted just 2 hours, but it was devastating. The Japanese managed to destroy nearly 20 American naval vessels, including 8 enormous battleships and more than 300 airplanes. More than 2,000 American soldiers and sailors died in the attack, and another 1,000 were wounded. The day after the assault, President Franklin D. Roosevelt asked Congress to declare war on Japan. Congress approved his declaration with just one dissenting vote. 3 days later, Japanese allies Germany and Italy also declared war on the United States, and again Congress reciprocated. More than 2 years into the conflict, America had joined World War II.